Welcome to the Mortal Realms, an Age of Sigmar story phase. Grab your hammer so we can clear a path through the chaos and forge our own narratives in the Age of Sigmar. In this episode, we cover the lore of the Idoneth Deepkin Battletome and your allies through the whirlways this episode are...
I'm Davey, and if we're going to spend this much time under the sea, there better be a hot crustacean band.
I'm Aaron. I'm a Namarti, and I like to party.
And this is Eric, and I can assure you, you won't want to miss the most current episode we've DUNE to date.
That's 4 of them right there. That's
Bang.
A record.
In this episode, we dive into the Idoneth Deepkin Battletome and submerge ourselves in the lore as we fish for secrets of these briny elves and information on their controversial god of light, Teclis. If you listen to this on a podcast, leave a review. If you watch this as a video on YouTube, like and subscribe the channel, and please, please, please share us with those you know new to the AOS community. How are you doing tonight, gentlemen?
Doing just fine.
Pretty good. A little soggy, but doing just fine.
A little salty or salt?
Also, why not both?
All right. That's good. I feel pickled. Pickled,
Okay.
Pickled pink?
Sure.
To be covering this Battletome story now?
Hey, good
Like-
start. Good start,
Yeah.
guys.
Yeah.
Well, what's awesome is that we're just excited about this. I mean, I think everybody's excited about this release, and everybody's like jumping out of the ocean into boats, like we're like fish trying to be caught, in order to like cover this and talk about it and share it. And
Losing me a little bit on that one,
Yeah,
actually.
this metaphor, like we need to break you out of this.
all right, I'll get the net, and we'll
For the hook.
we'll reel it back in. There we go. So tonight we're just going to be covering the story phase, the lore, the deep dark secrets, as I said, of the Idoneth Deepkin Battletome. Do you guys how do you guys want to get started? You just want to talk about overall?
Well, should we start from their origins, from whence they came, how they
Sure.
they came to be?
Solid.
I mean, the beginning is a great place to start. I've always said.
Predictable.
Well, I mean, we need to introduce a little bit of predictability. for these-
As predictable as Eric trying to cram 14,000 puns into the first 30 seconds.
Sure. I mean, I could have called that one.
I mean, that would have been a record, Davey, and there'd be surely news crews here to cover that.
Sure. Don't
Yeah.
don't call me Shirley. Guys,
I would have shut this down. All right, go ahead.
the origins of these elves, these Idoneth Deepkin, harken all the way back to basically the world that was. Like that's where the story is going to start for these guys.
In a bigger way than any other faction so far, for sure.
Yeah. I don't disagree.
Usually there's a hint or a slight mention, but it's like they own like their connection to the world that was many times through this.
So sort of taking a step back from the elves themselves, even from some of the earlier fiction, it was said that the elven gods, the elven pantheon, Tyrion, Teclis, Malarian, they had a hard time finding a lot of elves in the mortal realms, which is odd because it turns out there's a whole bunch of them just kicking it in his ear. But let's disregard that. But they were hunting for their elven kind, and they didn't know where they had went. The problem is that back in the world that was, back in the end times, those elf souls were actually swallowed up by a particular missing chaos god that we know as Slaanesh.
Yeah.
That's where they've been hiding this whole time.
What was so we kind of knew that Slaanesh had consumed the elves from the world that was. What I did not know, and maybe it was mentioned somewhere else, but not only did he consume all the elves' souls that died, but he went into the underworlds of the world that was and consumed the souls of all the elves that had already died in the world that was. So he got them almost all, apparently not quite all, but that was, take something dark and make it darker.
Yeah.
Well, and maybe this is jumping ahead too much, but he's not even just eating the souls, like he's eating their gods at the same time, which I don't know which is more impressive, but because it's at this time back in the end times, he's eating the elven souls and he's eating the elven pantheon. Proceeded to eat this. Ends up being a bigger name. Was it Mathlan? Am I saying that right?
Yep.
Bunch of consonants in that one. But
Also a proponent of STEM education.
Oh,
I'll let that sink in.
Yeah.
Well, I like the sync. I'll give you credit for that one.
This is Mathland, the god of math.
Math. Okay. Sure.
Yeah. We need graphics counter of like groaners up here, like check, little tally marks.
Yeah, that'd be
you got a big white surface behind you, Eric. You can just get a wax
mark it.
Yeah. Wax pencil. Mark
oh man, there's no way we're getting to time on this one. So yeah, Slaanesh, eating these elven souls, and the end times cracks off, and the world it was is destroyed.
Well, in the very last, they say the last elves that Slaanesh ate were the ones that Mathlan hid away in the world that was, and so, in some strange work of physics, the last souls in, kind of were the ones sitting on top.
Sure, I mean that's how science works.
Yep.
We don't make the rules. So then maybe we can fast forward to not Age of Sigmar necessarily, but Age of Myth anyways, where those elven gods I was mentioning before are hunting for those souls through some storyline that we know quite yet. They're able to get a lock on Slaanesh. Did I read somewhere that Tzeentch had a hand in it? I think that's some story.
Yeah, there is in the Disciples of Tzeentch book, they make mention that Tzeentch kind of led the pantheon of order to his brother's hiding place too.
Gotcha.
It may not be explicitly described, but it's strongly implied.
Sure, I reckon we'll get that story one day probably.
Oh, yeah.
So they get a lock on Slaanesh. He's hanging out in between realms, between light and shadow, which seems like a great place to hide stuff these days. If you want to hide a city made of glass, you could probably hide it there too. That's a Shadespire reference. That's where it is. And so from there, they're able to capture him, lock him down, and start squeezing the souls right out of him. That's how I picture it. Anyways, yeah, just one after the other. And like you said, the first one's in, or the last one's in, or the first one's out. We start popping out the original Idoneth elf souls, even though that's not what they're called at the time. Somebody want to tell me how that happens? Explain it to me.
Yeah, Teclis is so they're the three gods and Morathi have kind of a plan to take this elf stuff and kind of treat it as kind of forging material to create elves in the mortal realms. And in the Legion of Nagash book, Battletome, it talks a little bit about how Nagash saw a bit of this as Morathi was kind of taking some and hiding some away. But he particularly it mentions that in particular elf souls have unlimited potential compared to other types of souls, so they can become lots of different things or whatnot. So
really makes me feel bad about myself.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of places where you're going
to. This is why nobody should like elves.
So they each kind of want to form a race in an image that they are thinking about, and in particular Teclis is wanting to kind of recreate some of the past elven pantheon, and particularly the elves that he loved from the world that was, the high elves. And so he does so. He creates them.
Sure.
And then there's this
Sithai, Cythai.
Yeah, that's how Sithai. And in doing so, then as part of this, he created them, but these souls came out of Slaanesh, and he went through this process, casting this light of reason. And there's another term called receiving the aelves. And these new elves that he created shrank away from that light. Some of them even died to the light. And there's this, there was this idea, at least one group of them was called the Iron Rack, which we'll learn about later. And one of the greatest of them, High King Volturnus, who wasn't the High King at this moment, but these elves are considered to be like the closest to perfect in what Teclis was trying to create. But even they felt like there's something horrible deep down in their psyche, imprinted from their time inside of Slaanesh, and it caused them to flee, to run from this light.
Sure. And I think they really stress that trauma that these guys went through while hanging out inside of Slaanesh. I reckon nobody would have a great time of it in there. But like, I mean, however long the gap between the end times was and the equivalent of Age of Sigmar, like they're presumably just getting digested, tortured, whatever the equivalent is. I reckon that would mess with anybody, for centuries at a time. And it's sort of a theme throughout this whole book. It's something they can't ever really get over. So when somebody comes and gives you a sweet ass gift of life, light, and reason, they, whether or not they thought that they were worthy or not, but it's something they couldn't accept. It's something they couldn't deal with.
Yeah.
Bummer.
Which has caused a bit of controversy. I mean, coming from the end times and then seeing kind of the first that we learn about Teclis, kind of in this new game and in this new story, kind of paints him out to be kind of not great guy. At least that's some of what people have asserted. What is your guys' feelings on Teclis at this moment?
I disagree. Like, he's doing what he can, man. Like, how are you going to blame a dude for like trying to teach you how to read or whatever the equivalent was? I don't know. Like, he's doing the best he can. Davey, hit me.
Mixed bag, because once he realizes there's a flaw in these guys, his reaction is like, well, I'm going to hunt these down. I'm going to wipe them out. Like, this is, whoops, my bad, abomination. I'm going to go kill him. And it was his brother Tyrion who begged him not to completely wipe them out, on top of him maybe not being able to find them all.
In his defense, have you ever tried to teach someone how to read and them not being able to do it? Like, you'd want to.
No. Yeah. I mean, but I do hear where Eric's coming from. Like, all through the end times, he's one of the few people with enough power to maybe avert the apocalypse. And so he's trying to do what he can. He has some, desperate plan, and it fails. And it's like the saying where, history is written by the victors. So, in hindsight, you can look like, yeah, you really screwed things up. But at the time, if it had worked, then he'd be the hero, Go.
Yeah. I think that there's some myths and archetypes here where, I mean, on one hand, in the end times, right, this was a cyclical thing. They speak a lot about on one hand, he's just a cog in a wheel, right? Playing his part in this cycle that repeats itself. So, maybe he's the fool, but like there was a fool before him and he's just, the reincarnation of that fool, maybe. In this case, like where he's at now, and this is interesting because when we got Manfred back in some of those stories, we thought, oh, Manfred's different now. Like maybe he's helping, he's allied to the Stormcast, and and there's some things that kind of bring back, oh, that's good old Manfred. And there's some of those things here where I think sometimes too, like he's the god of light, which in this game is knowledge, right? And so there's bound to be that character flaw of like the most knowledgeable person is blind to something. And so maybe, there's this sense that in his desire to bring back, the best that he could think of, like he overlooked something. So I think that there's, and these are mythic creatures. So I think characters. So of course there's going to be some flaw here. At the same time, like we're reading a lot in Malign Portents about, Stormcast really going to town on trying to root out the chaos taint, and so he sees that in his own kin. There's some part that's like, hey, we got to get rid of this. Like we can't just let this chaos fester. And so there's that part of like being responsible for what you created as well. And when we're talking about gods, like sometimes that means destroying what you create, I guess. And I don't really put his responsibility at the same level of like, a dad, I guess.
Sure.
But maybe,
maybe taking this action, they seen it as for the greater good, right? Like he has a responsibility to the realm, not just to these things that he created. So
yeah, but we'll find out some more about that relationship later too.
Sure.
But I would agree. I mean, I think there's two sides to that story. I think you can, if you want to paint him as a buffoon, there's enough material to throw at him.
What colors, if you're going to paint him as a buffoon, what colors are those?
Red tomatoes.
Sure.
Would you throw those?
I guess. Right on.
Right.
I think We
We're
cracked
good?
that Teclis nut for sure.
We made the case. We made the case.
I agree. So,
I hope Chuck does. I hope Chuck approves of our.
Sure, it was a Chuck question, right? Who brought that one up?
Yeah, Chuck Moore, ODIAMH on Twitter. Thank you for the question, Chuck.
Thought provoking. So Teclis realizes his elves aren't all there in some way or some shape or form, and he's set out to try and kill him, but Tyrion stops him, and the elves flee. They flee from his light, from his reason, and they dive into the ocean, because that's where I'd go if I needed to run from a god. And they need to sort of find their way in the deep places of the world. In Highish is where they start, but they end up spreading all across the different mortal realms. So obviously they're dealing with sort of this internal turmoil. Psychologically they gotta tackle, but also they come across another issue they have as this sort of newfound race, and that's that their souls don't work. They
forgot to pack their whole soul.
Yeah. Oh, eesh, awkward. I mean, I forget my toothbrush a lot, so
yeah,
I see how that
swimming
works.
trunks for me.
Sure.
And you solve those issues by going and raiding villages to take what you need, right?
The other toothbrushes. Yeah. So to break it down, this soul situation is there's the initial grouping of elves that popped out of Slaanesh, and those are called the C word that I don't know how to pronounce, and they're also like the awakened. However, if they try to procreate is the word.
Make it to babies.
Sure. Yeah. Exactly.
Spawn.
I don't know much about babies, but it turns out some fraction of them end up being viable. It turns out more often than not, like what is it? We wrote it down. 1 in 100 will end up being sort of healthy and hardy and hale, which is a word they throw around a lot. But everybody else ends up being either lacking a soul or having a really withered, weak soul, and they die on the vine real quickly. And that's sort of the first issue that they face amongst many others, and sort of how they need to continue their race and keep them running if most of their progeny end up dying off. How do you guys feel about that? Being dads.
I mean, that's dark.
Yeah.
Just the idea of bringing, because we don't talk a lot of procreation in fantasy in terms of like all cultures. I mean, the big one always comes up is, how do orcs have babies if they're all males? And there's this, they're all fungus, or they're not, you don't see the women or that sort of stuff. I don't know. But in this case, we have an issue with the ability, and that's tough. I know, a lot of people go through that. That's not a like uncommon thing. And like just the idea of, and congratulations, Aaron. I think since the last time we recorded, you've got a new one in the nest, right?
A new what?
A baby.
Oh, I have to go. Thank you.
Congratulations. And so just we're that's a delicate time to be thinking about this type of stuff, right?
I'm not sure she has a soul right now, so.
Is she withering?
Probably
good.
I wouldn't call what she's doing withering, so.
But yeah, it's a hard topic, but it takes a already rare resource in elves and makes it even more rare and special. One of our Lord Barian on Twitter, Nico, asked the question: what separates the elves with souls from the elves without souls? And the Idoneth or Idoneth break very clearly down that line of those without souls are the Namarti, the withered souls.
They like to party.
And most of them are the low class. They don't have energy. They're not strong. They're not healthy. Most of them are laborers and work in their cities. And the strongest of those go to the battlefield, join the military willingly, because of what the military does. And we'll talk about that a bit. But they become the thralls and the reavers, and they make up the numbers. There's more withered Namarti than there are Hail, Sithai, or in this case, the other classes, which are the Isheron and the Akhelian. So, yeah, the Namarti, the withered souls, they got a bad lot in life for sure.
Yeah, it gives a nice sort of tragic underpinning to the army. Like, they do some pretty awful things, like raiding all kinds of settlements, raiding other elves, all these, in the hunt for souls. And so they need a pretty strong motivation for why they would do that, right? Like, why are they, you just need to know why they're doing it. Like, Khorne might do it for the fun of it, or, whatever the case may be. But why are these ostensibly order-aligned elves doing these awful things? And this gives you a reason why. Like, to what length would you go to save your children, save your race? So,
do we want to skip maybe to talk about what their solution is to this? Like, so not only are they withered souls, I mean, a lot of them are just initially, a lot of them were just dying straight off because they didn't have souls enough to sort of keep them going. And so, early days, the Idoneth developed a scheme or a mechanism by which to sort of bolster or reinforce the souls of these Namarti, and presumably some other version of elves. And to do so, surprise, they just steal them from everybody else. Initially, they try to steal them from sea creatures, which I think is a pretty, well, depending on where you fall, maybe it's a victimless crime. But it ends up not working, or it only grants them a little bit more of a lifespan, but then it still doesn't sort of stick. So what they end up needing to do is steal souls of, I don't know if it's sentient creatures, or I don't know. Basically, if they have an army, they probably have a soul that can be stolen by the Deepkin. And so there's a pretty elaborate, involved process to go out there reaving, hitting settlements, taking their denizens' souls and storing them and sort of injecting them into the offspring of these elves. And so when Davey talks about how you could justify such, what seems like senseless violence, well, it's not senseless when you're trying to save your entire race.
Definitely. Yeah, there's definitely a sense of do you take care of your own? Is survival of your entire species more important than everybody of another species living? Right? There's plenty of them in an abstracted way, and so does that justify it? Sure. Although we're at constant war, so
I don't know if Darwin considered this in his survival of the fittest theories.
Yeah.
Those canaries
didn't need to steal any souls.
A different place. Yeah. Weird. Continue.
So in order to do this, the Namarti aren't strong enough to do this on their own, and so they have to rely on the other, the Hail Deepkin, the Akhelian, which are the warrior elites, who run the armies, that fight in the armies, that are the cavalry, and they're also the nobles and prince or that kind of class, and the Isheron, which are the magic users. And whereas the Akhelian are the ones who go in the battle, they go and they hunt, they go and they raid, they go and they find those soul resources. The Isheron are the ones with the ability to work with the tides, work with taking the soul, severing it from the host body, and making it available for the Namarti and that sort of thing. And there's a really strong culture on both of these sides. The Akhelian have just this there's an interesting thing, because one of the interesting things about this birth rate is that, like, if you take two Akhelian and they have a baby, there's no guarantee that baby is going to be Hail, that it's going to be healthy. All of the Deepkin have the same chance of having a withered child as they do as having a healthy one.
And talk about this being like the number one thing that they've been trying to figure out the why behind this, right? Like it's the one answer they want probably more than anything, and they, despite all their efforts, have not been able to figure out the why.
Yep. So there's no, like, when we think about genetics, like, that's not the thing here. And so
no Punnett squares where you can do the.
Well, so the Akelian and the Isharan are very much. I mean, their children have become Namarti, and so when we talk about there was a question about how much animosity, or well, in particular, what separates them. Certainly, withered soul, not withered soul, but the Akelian are going to war on behalf of the Namarti, right?
Yeah, Lord Barion's asking what's the difference between what separates the ones that do have souls, the Akelian and Isharan. Yep. Not what separates the souls from the soulless. Like, how does one fall into one of those two castes? Is how I read his question here.
Yeah, so I answered that in brief already, but just thinking in general, there was a question out there too about are the Namarti treated as they're a lower caste, and there's certainly some negativity towards them since they are not as withered souls. They're not treated as fairly, but at the same time, the Kelian and the Isharan function and are going out on raids to help their whole community survive.
Sure. That was a question by Kyle V. Valdi 2011 was asking if the two factions, if they pity the Namarti or if they're aloof. I think it's pretty clear that they're not aloof. The fact that the entire society is willing to go to war to keep those Namarti sort of functioning, alive as long as they can, I think kind of proves that even the upper castes care enough about them to keep them going. Furthermore, often they're going to be those the Akelian's kids, knowing that your kid came out without a soul. Yeah, I mean, presumably I'm going to go fight steal all sorts of souls to keep them alive. So I think there's heck even a certain level of familial. There's the word. Familial connection between these people as well. You never know if you're. I mean, there's a great chance your kid is going to end up being a Namarti, and so because of that, I think there's a strong connection between sort of the upper and lowers. And just because you're putting them to work doesn't mean you look down on them per se. Just more that's probably what they're suited to, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, maybe that's classist, but
well, I mean, they're certainly seen as tainted. Like that. Yep. That being said, there's a reason they're a lower class, right? And so while they are going to war for these folks, they're also they're still a little bit of the other and the strange or whatever. So
sure, they don't have eyes. That's odd.
No, yeah, I agree. I think that's where that struggle is, because they do. There's certainly instances where the way they treat them, the way they that they're the laborers and not the nobles, right? What's interesting about the Isharan is that there's so many different ways that they're using magic in this caste, or in this grouping. There's tide casters who are masters of the sea and the air and the current, and they control the Aether Sea, which we'll talk about at some point. There's soul scryers that kind of are the navigators, and can find the brightest souls, the ones that would have the best efficacy for their needs. There's soul renders that can help remove that animus from others, but these guys are also trained in combat, which is pretty cool. They can revive the Namarti with those souls, and so they can kind of do this transfer thing. There's soul wardens who do this kind of tally thing. They're keeping track of their soul resources. There's an interesting, I guess we'll get to part of their culture where they store these souls that they capture in these living coral reefs called corylliums. There's true healers. There's embalers, which use their magic to tame the beasts. There's corrales, which craft living structures through song. And there's incubati, which are keepers of those with the withering souls, so custodians, and work with the corylliums as well. But there's even more than what they list here, I think. But there's just a richness to how they use magic, and Teclis taught them that reading that he taught them was, some of that was magics and how to work in the world. But when they left and fled, they didn't have everything that they needed, and so they've had to work and find new magic in the sea and in themselves, and in their kind of elf essence, to create all of these different ways that they use magic to survive in these deep, dark places, which is pretty cool.
I like to kind of equate it to, like, there's the lores of magic that, like, we know, like the 8 realms, or like from 8th or whatever. But these folks kind of created their own, like, lores to some degree. It focused on, like, the things that they were specifically, like, the things they cared about. So, like, instead of the lore of death, they're dealing with the lore of making coral into a tower or something. And so I don't know, I saw sort of the equivalent there, that they had to focus on their own sort of isolated lores of magic, which is kind of cool.
There's some mention in one of the Realm Gate War books of free people mages, like chrono mages and something else too, like builders that can manipulate stone and stuff like that. So there's kind of this idea of like functional mages, not the opposite. You know, there's battle mages that we have war scrolls for.
Sure.
But that even the, you know, free peoples use magic for a lot of different things too. So yeah, that there's function, like their magic isn't just something for the battlefield. People are using it all over, which has cool implications for, you know, AOS role playing, you know, down the road,
if it ever shows up. And final thought. No, I lost it. Keep going.
Yeah, so I just thought this book talks a lot about their magic users, not just in battle, but in their whole kind of society and ecosystem, just in the same way as the Akelian aren't just on the battlefield, but they're also, you know, nobles, and they have to negotiate with each other and work out society and that sort of stuff. And when you're a dying race, a dying society, and you're all kind of affected by this withering, it creates a lot of tension. And then the other thing is so what we run into is that because they fled, they have to deal with this withering, but they're also dealing, the place they decided to go in the world was down into the depths of the oceans, where the biggest, baddest, meanest creatures live.
Sure.
So that's second thing they are up against.
I mean, that's no big deal though, right?
They got this.
No big deal. So, and that if there's themes sort of permeating through this book, that's another one, I guess, is the isolation, and then the survival aspect of what they have to do, and they sort of go hand in hand, right? Is the more isolated you get, the harder survival is when you're dealing with, like you said, the biggest, baddest beasts of the ocean.
Yeah, and there's this aspect of this isolation. One, it's because you're a wounded civilization. How do you trust anybody not to take advantage of that? You're ashamed, right? So you're going to a place where you feel like you're worthy of, or that, you know, you're not worthy of better, maybe. And then there's this aspect of being down in the depths where you're depraved of a lot of senses, that is connected to, you know, how Slaanesh is all about overcharging your senses, in kind of not embellishing, help me out,
enhancing,
indulging,
yeah, like the sensory deprivation chamber, right? Like if you had near eternity in this Prince of Excess, you know, stuck in there, then the last thing you want is to be around anything, you know, anything else. So like, get in there where it's dark, get in there where no one else can get at you.
Yep. And they seek that there's this part of their psyche that they're afraid of letting have any space,
right?
And so they deprive themselves. So there's some self-punishment in that, which is again, dark and sad. So how did that isolation go for them?
I think it went fine for a while, as well as living at the bottom of the ocean could possibly be. I obviously, and as we've sort of alluded to, just the fighting the beast like that. It took some doing to establish themselves down there, when constantly being snatched out of, you know, a cave by an eel or eaten by a shark or something. You know, as happens when you go swimming. But once they were able to sort of establish their kingdoms, I don't know what you'd call them, cities, settlements,
enclaves, yeah.
Enclaves. Oh, good. Yeah, good job referencing notes from earlier. I guess whether or not this is true, whether it's a function of their internal taint or what have you, but familiarity breeds contempt, and they started having to like branch off. Like once they were able to get like a handle on like their civilization and get their numbers at the right level, they needed to expand and branch out and sort of individual enclaves and end up having to do their own thing. So there was I think a brief expansionary period. That's how GW can justify all the different color schemes for all the different enclaves that spread out to the different realms, which is cool. No judgment.
A recovery period.
Yeah, exactly. And everything's going great, and they're just stealing souls and living the dream. Lucky for them. However,
they're aided by this whole thing. Is they have this magic of this seclusion thing, but this magic that makes people forget them.
Sure.
So they can make these raids, and as long as they're not overextending, then even if some people are left alive, they don't really remember what happened. So it helps them to keep this anonymity throughout the Age of Myth.
Sure, and it's something, at least if you ask them, it's necessary. It's something they need for their own sanity or what have you. However, nothing gold can stay.
Well, sorry, I know you're trying to hit this point, but we keep stopping you. Sorry. In that memory repression, there was a question from Valdi 2011. Have they been a part of any of the storyline already that is explained by them vanishing from memory? And Davey, you had recalled such an occasion.
Well, just recently in the Legion and Nagash and some of those Malign Portents and such, they talk about Nagash knows, and we know that he thinks the Sigmar is stealing souls that rightfully belong to him with the whole Stormcast situation. But there's references like, hey, someone else is stealing souls, and I don't know, I haven't figured it out yet. I haven't cracked the code on that. Arcane's trying to figure it out too. And at the time, we're hypothesizing like maybe Manfred's, trying to sneak in there or something else. But there's good reason to believe that this must be what they're referencing. As far as something bigger than that, reaching further back, possibly, but I can't think of it. And if they're explicitly mentioned in some of the more important stories. But
Davey, would you suspect that they are mentioned in previous like Realm Gate Wars, but they've wiped it from your memory?
I knew where that was going.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing on that is they do mention that the Stormcast somehow prior to the Realm Gate Wars did know the presence of the Idoneth, and they sent an emissary to request assistance, and they were turned down. The Idoneth weren't ready to come back up and be part of this whole thing. So that explains their failure or whatever, their decision not to participate in the Realm Gate Wars.
You skipped like 2 ages, guys.
No, this is still Age of Myth.
That Stormcast didn't exist in Age of Myth. Don't do a narrative podcast. You should know that.
Oh, you're right. But so them trying to reap souls, and one of the things that they used as far as storytelling to hide their existence was the rise of chaos. And so in the Age of Myth, prior to the Age of Chaos, they're doing their raids, they're killing, attacking villages, and stealing their souls. And an interesting aside of that, or effect of that, is that when they take somebody's soul, it just puts them into a sleep that they'll never wake up from. And so like there's part of that lore and that craziness is that there's entire villages of people that are asleep that will never wake up.
At this point in my life, it sounds really great. Right?
New dad fatigue. Yeah. It's but so they use the chaos the increase in chaos activity as a cover for that as well. But then what happens, Aaron?
I'm not even a Slaanesh guy, and this tickles me pink, to reuse the phrase. So is okay, and someone's gonna have to help me here. They're found out, or someone's able to sniff them out. Is this because of the deal with the gods and Morathi taking elf souls out of Slaanesh? Morathi's been real sneaky and like skimming off the top, taking extra souls, and that's thrown the whole balance out of whack. And in doing so, has sort of alerted Slaanesh followers, has given them sort of a hint that there's more out there, and they're hunting other souls. Is that where that comes into play now?
That might be a little bit later. It's not 100% clear to me. And again, Eric mentioned this early on. Like the book kind of jumps around, hits the same thing several times from different angles. I think that happens a little bit later. What happens here is a keeper of secrets / the depraved. They're doing their Seekers of Slaanesh thing. They're trying to find Slaanesh, and he happens across this Idoneth band right as they're raiding a village.
Oh, is that what it is? Okay, so they didn't find him in the ocean. Gotcha. I read the book, honest.
Well, it's just one little bit in that timeline stuff. But it follows them back, starts carving them up, but then gets himself wiped out by counterattacking Idoneth. So it sounds like, well, one nice thing they say there is here's the problem is that demons, they can be banished, but they are immortal, and Keeper of Secrets are not always accurately named. Which then later the Gaunt Summoners get some sense of it. They figure out this demon's true name, call it up, get the information from him. And it's like, okay, we need to verify. So they send Skaven, Archaon directs Skaven to go, try and find actual proof of the Idoneth to confirm this demon story.
It's the most evil game of telephone.
Yeah. Well, what I enjoyed this because I thought it was cool. It reinforces Archaon as kind of this, like chaos often is chaotic. Go figure. But this gives them a shows how some of the grander schemes are operating, or some of the structure. Like it's not all just chance. There's intention behind some of the things. That's what makes Archaon one of the more interesting villains of the Age of Sigmar. So.
Sure, it's not his three-headed dragon. It's stuff like this. And so the Skaven find like one or two. I forget at least one of the enclaves. The enclave that's riding on a continent-sized creature's back. But at any rate, they start, I guess, submarining down there.
So there's a bit of a kind of the Skaven find them. I think they find the Shyish ones, or it's the Nautilus.
The Nautilus.
And they wipe out those Skaven, but they send more Skaven, wipe those ones out, send more Skaven. So there's a few attempts over like a course of maybe like 10 years or maybe a century. I don't know.
One of those two.
And then finally, they get through, and I think they drain. There's a couple of like enclaves, like offshoots that get wiped out by some Skaven, but there's this one of the sea in Shyish gets drained by a Skaven gnawhole. Mm-hmm. And when the curtain falls and you're down at the bottom of this ocean or sea or whatever, it's no longer hiding you.
Right. And this event actually might be detailed from the Skaven perspective in The Great Gnaw, one of the malign portent stories. There's certainly one where there's a Skaven tunnel that accidentally breaches and gets itself like super duper flooded all the way back to the Skaven city. So,
this might be it.
Yeah, this might be the other side.
So there's a couple of different enclaves that are getting run-ins with Skaven, and the one that you mentioned with the Nautilus, their city is on top of a giant creature, and I think they get pretty well beat up. But in this case, it was the name of the Igmar Deepkin are in this ocean, and that gets drained, and Nagash is able to see them. And from
Nagash now? Like, geez.
Nagash is able to see them. And so now the undead are trying to cross heaven and earth, I guess, to try and wipe them out, because Nagash knows.
He knows a lot. But I think that this sort of highlights, and I think we've touched on maybe the main antagonists, but despite their best efforts of hiding at the bottom of the sea, like nothing stays secret for long. in the mortal realms, and you can try and like interact with the world as little as possible, but someone's still going to find you eventually. And so even the most secretive races are going to come up with some enemies along the way, and sort of it's gonna drag them into the, if not the spotlight, into some to the surface at least of the mortal realms, which is why we see them.
Well, there's a couple of cool things, to talk about is one of the things that's going to help determine kind of their future is if we talk about the enclaves a little bit, because there's some interesting insights that come out of reading about the enclaves. But there's also really quick, what's cool about this book too is about all the sea creatures they talk about that aid the Idoneth. And, you talked a little bit about how, they're fighting these sea creatures. They're trying to domesticate some of them. And what they find too is that some of the they can't use just beast handling. Like there's no way to domesticate any of these creatures. It seems like, so they have to use magic to control them. But that doesn't totally work until they figure out that they need to blind some of these creatures, again, rude, cut their eyes out, and then this kind of mind control magic works better. I hate to say
it, who discovered that? Who figured that out first?
You know what I need to try?
To me, I was trying to figure out if they'd tie it eyes are the window to the soul.
What? Okay, that's fun.
If that had anything that if they cut the eyes out, then there's no window for the soul. I don't know. No, but there's a ton of these cool creatures that they use. So they couldn't use traditional animal handlers, so they created a new caste of magic user, the Isharan, called the Embalers. And so they had some successes. The Octars, an Octar is the guy who's behind that Soul Warden character. And then the Deep Mares are ridden by the Achaean King. Achaean Kings. But then there's some other ones. There's luminar fish that provide bioluminescent light to them. There's druil fish that aid in the boring out of spaces, in addition to their ability to affect the coral and all that kind of stuff. There's a store of fish that hold arcane charges that they use in their temples and shrines. There's Fuiodon, which have molten discharges that they use for their forges. And then of course, from the cool, models that are coming out, we've got the alopex, the sharks they use for monster hunting, the leviatons, which are these giant living fortress turtles. And then there's the Fangmora eels, which I think are going to be a favorite. That there's one of the sometimes they hunt in packs, sometimes they ambush. And there was a question again, I had put it someplace else. Are there different subspecies of these creatures depending on the realm they are located in? And there are some in one of the enclaves. They talk about one being so awesome and aggressive that they are the only ones that can create bond beasts out of the tiger-striped mordacious alopex and the diamond-backed red-fin Fangmora.
Yeah. Cool. Gives you, a reason to have, just a little bit more flavor for your individual units or whatever.
I think that was a Valdi 2011 question.
That guy. Great questions. But these, what did you guys think about these creatures as a...
Oh no, did he freeze?
He did.
Oh geez. All right, it's the Aaron and Davey show now. I shouldn't allude to it. Let's just keep going and pretend like it's not a thing. If anybody listening ever gets a chance to read this book, you're going to be sort of inundated with just a never-ending stream of fantastical creature names coming through. We didn't scratch the list whatsoever. There's tens and however. And half the fun, I think, is sort of trying to imagine what half those creature names, what they actually are, what they would be. I'm sure there's a variety of krakens and and squids and all sorts of crazy ass stuff too.
That thing that G-Dub does so well, where they do those little hooks to get you in. You think get your brain thinking. So here's some stuff up front. Here's some stuff that just hint at.
Sure. G-Dub, do me a favor and at least make some of them. Like make it pay off. Like make me convince me that these are actually real things. So like however next time you do an Idoneth release, make some of these new ones because I want to see the fish tank of all the fish in this army. No, Eric, you're back. Welcome back.
Cool. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right.
What'd you think of all the creatures, Eric?
I loved it. Yeah, I mean, I always like the stories where they delve more into like how they actually live. Or just how they're getting around, garrisoning, creating their structures, creating their helping them in their day to day and all that kind of stuff. And this is such
a farm.
Yep, the farming.
But they didn't even remotely talk about farming in this.
Kelp harvests.
I guess they just eat fish, probably. Neat. I gotta catch myself where we're at.
So the other thing was then, after talking about those, which I think are an important part, was talking a bit about the different enclaves and. There's of course they split and win.
Well, losing him again.
Am I still here?
Yeah. Okay,
so they use these whirlways to get around, that are basically like underwater realm gates, and there's a bunch of them. But they split into these different enclaves, and there's so much character in these enclaves that just do you guys I don't want to go to our favorites yet, but is there any of these that stuck out to you as being unique or something you didn't expect?
Well, I'll say that one of my favorite things about Age of Sigmar or the Mortal Realms or what have you is the fact that we are dealing with like 8 very distinct realms, and more often than not for each of these armies we end up getting sort of hallmark versions of each army and sort of how they live in each of the realms, and Idoneth is no different. We've got these armies that are sort of indicative of what it's like for a Deepkin enclave to live in the realm of beasts or the realm of fire or what have you. Maybe some of them are a little on the nose, I guess, in that like the Akshi enclave is real hot-headed, like literally, like and so I mean that's great and fun, and I'm sure they have to exist. So by all means, let it be the Akshi one. But I think they tend to stick to the Gur because if they're dealing with a lot of beasts, that ends up being sort of their motif. I think there's a couple of them in Gairan for different reasons. There's the Shyish one, as you can expect. They wear black. They're real bummers.
The more fan.
Yeah, exactly. I should be using names, but
that's all good.
But it's par for the course, but still fun to read about to see how it translates. Yeah.
It can make for some of the best moments in the novels when you come across, whatever race it is and how are they operating. I'm excited to hear more about the realm of light and shadow because we haven't seen, what by and large, other than Daughters of Cain, which are operating out of there. But it's fun way to see, what do dispossessed look like when they're in, in the realm of death or that sort of thing. So
yeah, exactly.
Eric, did you have a favorite of these?
Yeah, I mean, I think and worth talking more about would be the Iron Rack, which are the most kind of the top shelf. They would be the hammers of.
I was just gonna say hammers of Sigmar.
Kind of they were the most like what Teclis envisioned for this race. They describe them as bright-eyed, intelligent, and more social. Like they're the ones reaching out beyond. They're certainly kind of like the big brother trying to keep all the enclaves together and in communication and talking to each other and sharing information. However, the one, well, I'll use that. There's two of them that are branches off of that kind of were like, we like that, but we want to go do our own thing. And the Bryamdar was one that appealed to me. But I'll let you guys, if Bryamdar is Bryamdar one of your guys's? I don't want to spoil that one if you guys.
It is. It's mine.
Okay.
Yeah, that was the one I was pick actually.
So I'll just finish with the Iron Rack real quick. Is that
sure.
they've got the High King is an Iron Rack. The High King Volturnus was the first of his kind, the last Sithai still alive. Kind of rumored to be more special than people think, but not everybody believes that. Teclis gave him his sword and his shield. And it's even said in here what it says here is only the Iron Rack are the only enclave to be led by a living Sithai, and that's Teclis the Illuminator. So there's this sense that maybe the Iron Rack have made amends with Teclis, that they still take lesson or leadership from him, which is interesting.
I didn't catch that. That's cool.
I didn't miss that myself. Yeah.
So it's in, if you read the I think the Iron Rack section of the book.
Oh, the Iron Rack section.
It's like I think it's right at the end or in like a box or something like that. But it was like, ooh, weird.
Gotcha.
Did not expect that. So
sure. Yeah. So I mean,
I will pass.
I like them too, if for no other reason that it sort of gives them a connection to the outside world. For some folks who are so isolated, it's hard to see what, or just like envision what that interaction with the rest of the realms would be like. So
these are the guys that are most likely to like ally with another race willingly and not just out of convenience.
Sure.
Like,
yeah. Very indicative of how one might classify them as order, despite the fact that they're stealing souls left and right. But my jam was the Bryamdar. So they're a group kicking it in Gairan, which is my favorite realm, listeners. But these folks are real. They're the masters of like the ambush and like the hit and run. And for folks who don't know, I was a big Wood Elf player, and that sort of bridged that gap or that connection. Even though these are elves living underwater, they got a real strong Wood Elf vibe. And I'm into that. They're wearing green, and I got more green paints than I know what to do with. And their mounts have like a dappling color scheme because they're sort of flitting in and out of like kelp forests and stuff, and they're getting hit, with different sunlight and so on and so forth. Anyways, I thought it was a real cool take on a way of blending the undersea elves, the ocean elves versus the wood elves, which is a connection that I also get sort of elsewhere in the book as well. They do have sort of a wood elf vibe, but just an under the ocean wood. That was weird. I know what I'm talking about. David, what's your favorite?
Well, go ahead.
Sorry, real quick. What's most important about the Bryamdar is that they seem to have unlocked some secrets.
Yeah.
Do you want to hit on that real quick?
Well, other than that, it's just rumored that maybe they have come up with a way to, they could heal a soul, or just reverse the curse that they're suffering for. But they don't really allude to how or what have you. I forgot all about that. I guess I don't really care about souls. I more care about.
Well, this is the ray of hope, right? In this story is maybe they've figured it out. Maybe their Ishlon have unlocked something. Again, they have the history as a race of figuring out their own magics, and so this is kind of interesting.
True.
Before I jump onto mine, I'm going to try to save us for some corrective tweets here. I went, because this is a big thing, right? Like, have they made up with Teclis or not? I'm looking at this paragraph. It says, alone with the Iron Rack, alone of all the enclaves, the Iron Rack are led by a living Sithai, an ancient being who was brought to life by the magics of Teclis, the Illuminator himself. I think what we're doing, we're referencing Volturnus, because remember we talked about he was there. So not impossible that they are making the connection, but I think that's what they're getting at there.
No, you read the sentence better than I did. You're good.
But my favorite, I did not pick one of the main ones. There's the Ymirloc, I think you say it, Ymmmerloc. They're in the realm of death, Ymirloc of Hellfrost. And there's not very much about them, but for a faction that like seems straight out of like a black metal band name, you know, like these are the ones that like double down on that, have the name. You can almost see it in that, you know, the crazy metal lightning bolt writing and all that sort of thing. Dressed up in the corpse paint and all that sort of. I mean, when you think about it, like this crushing isolation, icy cold blackness, you're like, this is a very black metal sort of faction, and I really like that going all out on that. And that's an example of, you know, just how one of those hooks it's really just a name and a where they're from, Hellfrost. You're like, like that intrigues me, and so that would be the one that I would put together, even though I don't have any cool rules.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah, the you could probably use the Morphan rule or something, that they have something where it kind of like chills the air, like a chill mist or something.
Right, that's a good point, because a lot of that, like the Morphan guys have like their Tidecaster Ether Sea sends foes into nightmares and stuff. Like it really, ties in pretty nicely. So,
I mean, if you're Idoneth, you see me one Idoneth and Shyish, you've met them all.
Yeah.
But so those are, you know, a number of those. There is a question about animosity between two factions, and by Valdi, 2011, and one of the factions, Futhun, of actually, like you said, are probably the most impetuous, and we'll talk about it in a minute as we go through some of the different units and that sort of thing. But one of the things that they try in the society is that they try and keep a balance. So between the powers of the Ishlon and the Achillean, even if they're not equal in number, they try and share rule. Sometimes that doesn't work. So the wording of some of these paragraphs, like paragraph starts off as like, hey, they try and keep them all balanced. But then also like that doesn't usually happen. Like the paragraph ends with like, well, but they don't really do it. But the Futhun unabashedly put the Achilleans ahead. They're more militant, and so the Achilleans are given more power than the Isharon, which is an interesting thing. So the question was, is there animosity? And I would say probably not in it. They're all in it together. And you know, everybody's relying on each other. But if there were animosity in one of them, it seems like, you know, hot-headed Idoneth, that this would be the place some of that could happen within that faction.
Right. Yeah, true. But you kind of touched on how like they're all in it together. I think both sides of that coin are necessary. Like there's also a theme permeating this book saying that generally like both methodologies are necessary for the survival of the race, and that like you gotta have that martial prowess so that you could go out and like start collecting those souls. But like in order for that to be effective, you need the magic to both keep the race back home like alive. You need the magic to collect the souls in the first place. And you need the magic to keep the Ether Sea going, which I guess we really haven't talked about all that much. But you need both for the continued success of a given phalanx or you know, whatever you want to call it.
So do you guys want to talk a little bit about the Ether Sea, or do you want a quick rundown of where that how the Eidolon exists?
Good question. Let's do Ether Sea, because that's, I think, a more bigger picture, broad thing. Sure. So as it just sort of alluded to, and anybody who sees the models will note that it's a bunch of sea creatures with ground bases for the most part, but on flight stands. Like, how does that work? Do all these eels and sharks and turtles fly? Not necessarily, but the one of the hallmark spells of the mage class of the Tidecasters is that they're able to bring the ocean with them in some sense or another. They're able to sort of create a fake ethereal sea to travel along with their phalanx so that all their little sea creatures can swim. Plus, they have some added benefit because they happen to live in the ocean. So like if they're fighting different armies, and someone gets too close, it'll suffocate them because it's basically like they're underwater, or increases the pressure on a given person. There's not much more to it than that, at least from my perspective. It's basically just a spell. Like, it's something they learned how to do, and it makes them more effective. Like, I mean, I don't fight, but if I did fight, I think I'd prefer to like not be underwater when I did it.
Well, some of the things like we were talking about, the more fan use it can kind of make it more frightening, or kind of make that magic, the kind of the mournfulness of the Idoneth, and like put that on the viewer or the person they're attacking.
Sure, projection at its finest.
The Nautilus are able to like create bubble shields, so they can use, so having that like water energy up there, so they can use some of those same, so they can use the same skills that they have in the water on land, right?
Totally.
The way they fight, the way they move, all that kind of stuff. They just kind of create an ether. It's ether currents and ether wind, water, and all that kind of stuff. Which, I mean, we've got Dwarden on metal bubble ships, in ether currents, ether gold, right, and other gases and that sort of thing. So it makes sense, or it might even be the same stuff. They've just named it different, or they use it different.
Yeah, I didn't make that connection, but ether is like a very purposely chosen word, I assume.
Yeah. Did any of that not jive for you guys? Did it all fit for you as far as like a magical explanation for it?
A wizard did it. It's fine. I don't know. It's good enough for me to justify why they would be there. Like, if you wanted to make an underwater army, you'd need a reason why they could do what they do, and that's as good a reason as any in my book.
Yeah, same boat.
Yep. So, kind of the two things I want to touch on before we wrap up, and obviously if there's more, we can hit more. I want to talk a little bit about the Eidolon, because I think it brings us back to kind of this core of their being in terms of the souls. And then go to kind of where that leads to in terms of how that relates to Slaanesh. There is, let's see, there's a fear amongst the Idoneth, and again, it's back to this sense of that there's something broken about them. There's something in their psyche that they don't want to acknowledge or have light shown upon, right? And they have this fear that their souls, when they die, might be reclaimed by Slaanesh. And so, when their physical shells expire, they use their the soul wardens and the soul all these different terms, the soul renders, they put those souls into those corelliums, the living coral reefs, and they store them there. And as I mentioned, they kind of can use those souls for different things, and they can allot them, and they can dole them out, and they can use them. If they're going to go on a raid, they could probably bolster some of their Namarti, do that sort of thing. But when they need to, when there's kind of a consensus that it's something that's worth doing this for, they can do this disturbance of the dead, and they can call upon those souls that are inside the corellium, and they're roused, and they can send a piece of themselves. So they're not taking the whole soul, but they're sending forth a piece of every soul that's in there, and it kind of forms this consciousness, this personification of this ancestral memory, and that these Idoneth took from Teclis in the stories he told this admonishment, or not admonishment, this admiration for kind of the elves of old and the stories of Mathlon and what he did for them. And so when they call upon this disturbance, an Eidolon appears, and it takes the form of the shape of the visage of Mathlon, and is able to project in kind of a psychic way the collective kind of feelings and kind of push of the Idoneth. So each enclave likely has one of these graveyards, these soul Corellium, and they're able to call upon it and use it. And it makes it, the way they talk about it is it's kind of like, I mean, there's some reverence for it, you know? And so that's, and the idling can take the aspect of the storm, which is the power of the sea and the destroyer, or the aspect of the sea, which is kind of this calm, and they describe it as this edge of the abyss. And, you know, you think about them down in their deepest, the darkest places in their, you know, kind of void of senses kind of space, that it's the other side of that whole dichotomy of them, the destroyer, the chaotic sea, and then the calm abyss, which is kind of a cool aspect of kind of them as a character, you know, as characters, how they use all this again in their whole relationship to the soul, and then their relationship still with Slaanesh.
Sure, yeah.
Which leads to what you were talking to about now, Morathi's moves. How has that affected? How has that affected our the status of Slaanesh? Do you guys?
So her machinations have unbalanced and shifted the trap that he's currently in the hidden gloaming in between Hish and Ulgu. And what that's done is it's let a little bit of that scent out for these seekers of Slaanesh, and so they've been invigorated. Like, hey, like there's something going on. They got some sense that Slaanesh is closer to being discovered than ever before. So the seekers of Slaanesh are going crazy looking for him now. Like are emboldened because they feel closer to success. This is important because we've seen things like these, hints of factions to come. With, you know, before overlords came, there were like the glowing clouds, golden clouds, and things weren't returning from them. And there were some, you know, like we talked about the mentions of souls disappearing to somewhere, didn't know where. Nagash couldn't quite figure out where. So like that's a pretty good indicator that we might be seeing Slaanesh on the horizon before too much longer. So
yeah, I feel like the followers of Slaanesh are going to figure out where she is at, and charge that, you know, pull the full force towards that. Freeing.
Davey, I would have thought you would have been more excited. Give me a smile. There it is. Those pearly whites.
And so that's kind of where, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that kind of get shaken up here. We learn about them, but this relationship to Slaanesh is strong, it seems. And I wonder too, like, if Slaanesh is awakened, is that going to do anything to these guys, right? Or could we get a narrative campaign a global narrative campaign that they host, and it could go one of two ways, right? Mm-hmm. Some of their faction goes over to Slaanesh, or is more crazed or, you know, shameful in their eyes, or they conquer it.
Here's a consideration about all that as well, right? So these guys were the last in, first out of Slaanesh, mm-hmm. and so they spent the least time consumed by Slaanesh, and they are pretty messed up.
Yeah.
So what about these ones that have been in there even longer? Like, what are they looking like? So,
well, aren't the daughters of Cain, like, they were made in sort of Slaanesh's image a little bit? Or well, Morathi was specifically, like, her monstrous form is like
indicative of
Slaanesh, right?
Good example. So.
And I feel like the other ones are too. I just read it, but
I got to confess to not having read that Battletome yet, so I can't kind of remember the other. But
so there's that. But like it was said, and I don't remember what book it was, but I mean, we know 2 out of the 4 god, or, you know, at least powerful, like, Elven Pantheon folks, what their armies look like. We see Morathi's army, we see Teclis' army, assuming that's the only one. But with Slaanesh, does that mean we get our Tyrian elves and we get our Malarian elves? Like,
interesting. Right.
Tyrian elves, like it was said, again, I don't know where, I gotta look it up, but like his host is a little bit more angelic, which how? Like they were all sitting in Slaanesh, I don't know how that works. And then the Malarian cohort is more monstrous, which makes a little bit more sense.
Yeah.
So hopefully, I mean, if I had my druthers, it'd all happen at the same time, and we'd get them one after the other.
Well, that's when I heard that there was going to be 2 elf releases this spring, or fall, winter, spring. I was a little worried that they were going to pull the trigger too soon on Tyrion and Malarian. I was not even fathoming these 2 releases.
Fathoming.
Yeah. So I'm happy to know that that's still out there, and I think that they're going to be. I think there's going to not this year, but probably next year. There's going to be just another chance to swing back around to see what happens out of this story, which is cool. I'm really excited for that. Any big kind of world changing things that you guys want to call out before we go? Did you discover anything new about this world that you didn't know before?
There's a secret army of elves under the ocean. I think that's right. But no, just whether or not it's world changing. I mean, in a way, it is that like we're going to see more and more of them sort of rising to the surface and trying to seek out allies, or insert themselves into worldly affairs. As the Age of Sigmar marches on, I think it's pretty clear that they're going to be forced to interact with folks more often than not. We're getting already alliances between. After an initial alliance was shot down with the Stormcast, they're sort of coming back around to it. So like just to see how they're going to interact and involve themselves in the stories that continue, like in the other books, the novels that we'll continue to read as time goes on.
David, did you pull anything out that surprised you?
Not really anything that we haven't already talked about. I think the more information about the imprisonment of Slaanesh, and I didn't really piece it together until we were just talking now that like this idea of pulling each of these elven gods are trying to use these souls to create something in their own way, and so that's pretty interesting to think about what those will look like. So I think I think having some hints about where we're headed next. There was the Necroquake that Nagash unleashed, which was basically this big discharge of necromantic power, which shook all the realms, and is another thing that's forcing the Idoneth to get involved, is because requests for help are coming from all over. Themselves and others. So,
when they were talking about allying with the Stormcast, the first enclave to meet the Stormcast were the Domhain, which are kind of the savage and barbaric in Gur, and they went to fight them, but they discovered that they could not sever the souls of the Stormcast. So they decided to work with them. Right, they were not of any use to them.
They're like, my bad.
What I wonder though too is that means that again, obviously it makes sense. Stormcast are the golden kids of the stories.
We're still turquoise.
But that seems like that could pose a problem for Nagash as well. If obviously Nagash is the great necromancer, and so I can't imagine that the Idoneth power over souls is as strong as his. But it could mean that those souls are chained with stronger stuff than what we expected. So, undead Stormcast or evil Stormcast rumors I don't know, it might be harder than we think.
Sure.
So and then Skaven, there was one thing where the Skaven fleet went down in submersibles and the carcasses of sea monsters infested with rats.
Yeah,
that was pretty amazing.
Super cool.
Gross.
Yeah.
Real gross.
Anything else?
Just generally doing. Just say whether or not did you like it. Tell me, did you like it?
I liked it. I thought it was good. I thought it fit well as an Age of Sigmar army, like wackadoo. But I thought they constructed it well together. And I'm assuming, I don't know, like just the crack in the code. Like, how can we save this? If you did a faction from the sea but didn't let them bring their sea creatures, then they're just kind of guys who are still wet from running out of the water,
trailing puddles behind them.
So they did a good job with that, and then working in whatever direction they worked, but to get the I don't like we talked about with the searching for that isolation after being, whatever in the Lord of Excess, trapped in there forever. Like all those pieces fit together pretty well for me. So I thought it was good. I gave it a thumbs up. I wasn't opposed to the idea, but I wasn't especially excited about it until I started reading some of the background. And that actually started with some of the Malign Importance stories, and I was like, oh, this is actually kind of cool, and reinforced with this book. So
yeah. The Beastclaw Raiders came to mind a number of times as I was reading through this, just thinking of another race that's kind of running away from its past, formed kinships with these beasts and is constantly on the move. And I loved the Beastclaw Raiders. I thought they brought a ton of more depth to that faction than in the past, but I think where the Deepkin kind of have a couple of legs up is just in the conflict within the race itself. That gray area of being not being created from the light, but being so tainted with the dark that they're afraid of it. So I think that there's just so much to play with in that area of like, are they good? Are they bad? Are they order? Are they chaos? And being able to not have just black and white kind of army or a story that we get something complex to chew on a little bit. I really appreciate that because there's a lot of places to go. We have a lot of all good and all bad. Playing with this in between space, I think, is very modern and I think fits.
Yeah, and it's I've talked about it at great length, but chaos is more interesting when they're not just 100% one way, when they're relatable. The more complex factions are more interesting. So anytime they introduce that, whether it's with existing stuff or something new, there's just more to chew on, like you said. 100% agree.
Sure. From my vantage point, as I don't know if I ever talk about it here, but with you guys, I always talk about, I'm always looking for patterns or like just sort of like group things together. And so there's, with Age of Sigmar, G-Dub's sort of approached armies in a few different types of ways, whether it's, like you just say, chaos, they're building off their chaos armies, but either they're going to take a sort of small subgroup of a already like 8th edition existing faction, taking some part of it and expanding out to a bigger army, like the Sylvaneth or the Daughters of Cain or what have you. But then recently with this release, and I guess KO is a real similar release, they took something that like we all knew as like fans of fantasy, not just Warhammer fantasy, but just fantasy as a whole, and took sort of the essence of a given race and then just changed one thing and showed how that would look, how if you took them out of their element, changed one thing about it, and what a new army would look like in that sense. So if you took dwarves and they're still greedy and they're still into money and they're still gruff, but instead of living underground, you put them up on an airship. What's that look like? Like, how does that change things?
Yeah.
How do you take what you know about them and turn it on its head to make a new thing? And I think these Deepkin are very indicative of that as well. You've got your sneaky elves, your mysterious elves, your magical elves, hit and run, very, glass cannon-y sort of stuff, aloof, isolationist, you can go on and on, but instead of sticking them in the woods, what does it look like if those same elves lived underwater, under the ocean? Take everything you knew about them and just change the setting, and how does that create a brand new thing? And so I like to sort of see how that happens, see how they execute on that, and see the models that we get because of it. And then also I just like the idea of, it gets me thinking about what the next thing, like what's the next version of that? What's another race combination that you're not used to seeing? And I don't even have an answer. Like they're so out there that I don't know what the next one could be. But I like that they're trying. Like you heard it said that Age of Sigmar was a chance for GW to really create stuff that's very uniquely their own. And this is, case in point, this is exactly that. So kudos. Cool.
Digging it.
Yeah.
I'm going to pick me up a couple of these to use in some armies and some allies.
I know you are.
But who knows when. Got to get to a load of other ideas too. So
right now.
Cool. Well, thanks guys for reading through this and getting together and talking
stuff.
through these cool stories.
Real big chore. So you're welcome.
So are we ready?
Hit me.
All right. It's time for our reforging. Like I said, like and subscribe our YouTube channel, comment below, leave a review for us on iTunes, or follow us on Twitter at Mortal Realms. Davey, where can we find you?
I'm at red_Zeke, and you should also hit up Paul since he couldn't be here today. We didn't vote him off the island, but he's at PGA Shard, SCHARD, and tweet at him, see if he's got any crazy conspiracy theories about this book.
Oh gosh, we'll have to do it again and bring him back.
Yeah, they only like 280 characters for it, so.
That's true. You can get me a different Twitter handle. I'm changing it up, so you can get me at Dosaceos, DOSACEOS.
Go follow him. It's terrible.
Yeah, it's real bad.
Stream.
I don't
go do it. And you can find me, Eric, at Stone Monk Gamer. Thanks for listening, and look forward to joining you guys again in just a few days.
Is that true?
What? Foreshadowing. Oh, wait, I have to stop it. I'm running it today. This is weird. I'm just going to keep going. I'm not going to hit it. It's still going.